Okay, folks, it's a little after 4 o'clock, so I think we're going to start. I think a few words. First of all, can you all hear me? Yeah? No. Is that better? How about that? No? Still not right. Podiums. We don't have them in the UK yet, or at least not as fancy as this, so I'm still getting used to them. Okay, my name is Professor Paul Maharg. A couple of words of kind of introduction, as it were. First of all, I'm not from the... Oh, yeah. I'm not from the University of Washington. I'm from the Glasgow Graduate School of Law. Someone told me in Glasgow that Seattle was going to be cool and wet, a bit like Glasgow. So I brought lots of heavy shirts and Gore-Tex and stuff like that. And I'm afraid that the 2 T-shirts that I brought with me are kind of walking away on their own, so I had to buy a local one. Basically, I'm from this rather odd-looking institution called the Glasgow Graduate School of Law, which is part of both the University of Strathclyde and also Glasgow University. It's a joint initiative between the 2 universities. It's a graduate school, so what we do there is a number of kind of graduate programs, master's programs, but we also do a bit of professional legal education there as well. And I think what we need to do is maybe put that into some kind of a context for you so that you can understand what I'll be saying about simulation in professional legal education in Scotland. First of all, what we're doing in Scotland is really taking students through an undergraduate degree, 2, 3 or 4 year LLB there. And then what we normally do is, if students want to become solicitors or advocates in Scotland, then they have to do what's called a Diploma in Legal Practice, which is a 1-year course, 8 subjects, and it's assessed. And basically, it focuses on preparation for traineeship. It's organised by the Law Society of Scotland, and it is delivered in 4 centres, one of which is the Glasgow Graduate School of Law in Scotland. The others are Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Dundee. Thereafter, if the students still want to go into the profession, they have to obtain a traineeship, and they have to then go into the traineeship, and during that the 2 years there, they do a short training course called Professional Competence Course, which again we host in the ggsl. In addition, the trainees submit quarterly logs to the Law Society. All being well, at the end of the 2 years, they are admitted to the society. They're given a practicing certificate, and that's an end to their initial training, as it were. Quite a lot there to kind of take in. In effect, what you have there is anything from a 5 to 7 year programme of legal training in Scotland, very different from what you have here in the States. What I'd like to focus on is number 2 there, in particular the diploma, because that's the kind of watershed, as it were, where students who are coming from academic training, as it were, in the undergraduate LLB are really coming into the profession. And in a sense, the diploma is a kind of bridge between the 2, 3 or 4 year undergrad degree and subsequent practical training. What I'd like to do very quickly in this presentation is give you an overview of kind of simulations, what we'll be doing what we are doing in the ggsl as far as simulation training is concerned, why we do it. We'll give you a quick overview of one initiative called Ardcalloch, which is a fictional community that we use on the web in order to carry out what we call transactional learning. And I'll show you very quickly 2 examples of the sorts of projects that we undertake with the students. Personal injury and also private client project. And we'll look at some of the feedback as well from the students about these projects. First of all, though, some general words about simulations in general. We all know how useful simulations are. There's no question about that in terms of pilot training and such, like flight simulators are very common. We have them in medicine as well. When we, for example, look at online surgical techniques and things like that, there's an enormous amount of simulation out there. But what I want to do is to actually focus on rather an unusual aspect of simulation here, because I think it has a lot to tell us about how students can learn about law. And I want to look in particular at games such as EverQuest. Has anyone ever played these games? Hands up, anyone who's been a member of any online games? One? Possibly? Two? Yeah, so, okay. Well, I'm going to take you through just roughly what these games actually entail very, very quickly, so as to give you an idea of how they might actually pertain to the training of lawyers. First of all, we're looking at huge games in terms of the numbers of players. Lineage, hundreds of thousands of players there. We're talking about large corporations developing these games in great teams of developers. So this is not just one or two people kind of throwing things together there for their buddies. This is something that is a major product in the marketplace. We have large development cycles there. The games themselves, players are often involved in the games in getting goods in one way or another, so they can achieve status or a higher level within the game. They often get together in groups, sometimes called guilds. They interact with each other in these groups, and that's a point I'll come back to in a moment or two. In other words, these games are not like the kind of shoot and kill games that you see, and they're quite different from other games like Grand Theft Auto and so on. What you have there are games that are innately social, because people are actually interacting with each other over the web. The activities, moreover, are long-term. They're long-term because you have online characters called avatars, and basically those characters are extensions of yourself online. They have no end unless, of course, your avatar is injured or killed online for some reason or other. But your whole object, as it were, is to survive and thrive in that virtual world. EverQuest, Ultima World, Second Life, Sims, and so on. These are examples. This is the front end to Second Life. You can see the concept, I think, is very well portrayed by this graphic here. First Life, Kat Ramirez, and then Second Life, she's Echo Omega. She's an architect, or she could be a pirate or a game programmer or whoever she wants to be in this online world that you have here. What's interesting about this as well is that up here, you can see that we have a community, as it were. We have lots of downloads, services, and support. In other words, there's a whole kind of online community service that's devoted to supporting players online. Okay, I want to examine 5 myths, as it were, about these games, because, again, they tell us something about how people get involved in the games and how they can be useful to us in legal education. First myth is that these are mere nerd games. They're not worth much. Well, it depends what you mean by worth much, because in terms of corporations getting involved in these games, I think all you have to do is look at the research that's been carried out by Edward Castronova. And in that respect, I'd advise anyone who's interested in this to go to his blog and the blog of other, about 3 or 4 different authors, which is a marvellous resource for anybody who's interested in the analysis of the whole kind of concept and culture of online games. Castronova is an economist, as you can tell from the quotes that I put up here. The amount of revenue that's generated is quite considerable. When someone like Sony gets involved in these games, you know that there is profit in there somewhere. Whether or not there is still profit in there because of the whole variety of worlds that are springing up is a moot question. But nevertheless, we're talking about big bucks. We're also talking about a lot of time that players are spending online here. Average of 20 hours a week. And if we're talking about over 400,000 players in late summer 2001, we're talking about an awful lot more people who are playing those games now, some of whom are probably going to be your students. And as Castronova puts it there, we have a competition between Earth and the virtual worlds, and Earth is the lesser option for some of those players. Myth 2. These are shallow leisure economies only, not to be taken seriously in the real world. Not necessarily. And again, Castronova in a number of articles has pointed out just how economies, and particularly globalized economies, can affect the way in which the world, these second worlds, these virtual worlds, are actually constructed. Very interesting point there that, for example, Asian language servers, players there investing time to discover money and loot bugs which enable them to get more goods, as it were, online, and are now moving into newly opened English servers where there is considerable purchasing power. Really fascinating little point there. Myth 3, these are sometimes addictive or Tolkien fantasies. Obviously, Second Life isn't in Sims Online, but certainly as far as, say, Ultima World or Norath, the world of EverQuest, is concerned, there's a strong influence there on Tolkien and kind of fantasy literature generally. Well, not so. It's certainly addictive, but a lot of people, as you can see from these quotes here, are saying, well, so what? There's a lot of things in the world that are addictive, and, this is better than most of them, and it's certainly better than watching 4 or 5 hours of telly a night. It's a good point. Moreover, when Nicholas Yee, who was carrying out this research, actually asked the question, what is it that attracts you to these worlds? Well, the concept of gaining status and prestige within the world was certainly one of them, but also interaction too, as you can see from this quote by a 21-year-old woman who talks about the opportunity to interact with people. The opportunity to learn as well, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Learning from books vis-a-vis learning in the virtual world, and it's quite a fascinating idea that she learns from other people in the way that they play the game. Myth 4. All this is very well. It seems fun, but is it really learning? What sort of learning goes on in these sorts of games? Well, it's certainly not cases and statutes learning, that's for sure. There are two men talking, and it seems that most of the learning that goes on there is a kind of personal learning about themselves and what they do and how they interact with people. And it's almost as if what we have is there is a kind of opportunity to learn how they interact and to reflect on how they interact with people. Again, these are quotes taken from Nicholas Yee's research on virtual worlds. Final myth. Well, okay, that all may well be true, but it's about escapism. Well, no, actually, it's about something that's a lot more interesting, or maybe it's yes and. It's also about something more interesting, which is about social interaction. And it's also about identity choice. And that's really interesting when you look at a course like the diploma, because the diploma is really a course that is a bridge course between academic study and the start of professional life. And it's that little bridge, as it were. And you have the same, you have bar exams, you have that period when students are moving from a highly academic, in one way or another, background into the idea that they are going to be professional lawyers for most of their professional life. And that's about choosing identities, and it's about being certain forms of professional. And Castronova points out how virtual worlds are actually offering players the opportunity to try out things there, to try out for themselves new identities, and also to interact with others. Okay, we've talked very briefly about law student identity and legal practice. In more detail, though, and on a theoretical level, you could analyse just how these players actually work with their avatars, their online selves, and with other people online. It's almost a kind of form of what the sociologist Irving Goffman has called symbolic interactionism, as it were. It's a very highly pertinent theory, I think. It's also pertinent to the way that students themselves actually act towards each other when they're on a course like the diploma. Because they're full of anxiety, they're edgy about the sort of things that they're going to be doing. How do you become a lawyer? Because they know, of course, that lawyers are not just academic entities, as it were, that one night kind of shed the cocoon and suddenly they're newly fledged lawyers. They're really having to construct their identity there. And because of that, it's actually quite interesting for us to construct an environment, and similar in some respects to this sort of environment, and look at how they are actually going to be constructing their personal and their professional identity within it. In more detail, simulations in legal learning are opportunities for the world of practice to be brought to the students. But of course, they're safe from the realities. There is that, as Casanova puts it, the escape clause there. The realities of malpractice, of negligent misrepresentation, and so on. Enable students to practice legal transactions, as it were, and to discuss those. And the transactional nature of what we're going to be doing will be seen quite clearly in the examples that I'll show you in a moment or two. But it also helps me as an academic and the tutors that I work with who are coming from practice. There are just two of us full-time on the diploma in the last year or so, and myself and my colleague Patricia McKellar, whom you'll see tomorrow when we're talking about webcasts. The rest of the tutors, about 120 tutors on the diploma, come from practice. They're lawyers. They come in, they teach for 2 hours in civil procedure or whatever. They go back to their offices. So we have to organise the assessment. We have to think about the assessment. We have to think about the organisation of the curriculum across the 8 subjects, as it were, so that we have some kind of coherent curriculum plan there. And having a simulation environment enables us to have some kind of opportunity to have novel assessments, as it were, for the students, instead of the usual kind of, either open book or closed book examination, which is again an academic model, and we want to get away from that. Otherwise, you focus students back round into academia rather than into practice. And also, we want to encourage collaborative learning. The vast majority of students comment, and you'll see this from some of the feedback, comment on how the collaborative learning that they do in their academic life is very shallow. It's kind of little tasks, as it were, that they're asked to do, and then they don't do anything else. You'll see that we structure things very differently so that the collaborative learning is a lot deeper and long-term. And finally, students begin to see the potential for communication with computers, which they seldom see before because they generally use computers as word processors, or they're given little quizzes, question mark kind of stuff and all that kind of stuff. But which is all very well in its place, and that's good. But computers can be used for much, much more. And EverQuest and the world of Norath show us the way in that sort of respect. And show us the way, and I want to read this out because it's so important, I think. Shows the way to a form of learning that changes quite fundamentally what and how students learn. Okay, let's look at web-based simulations at the Glasgow Graduate School of Law. On our diploma, we have 256 students. We divide them into 64 firms of roughly 4 per student. It varies obviously from year to year, but that's the rough figures. Each of these firms, effectively we give them intranets, so we manage 64 intranets. Each of these firms, we give them a passworded office environment. They have access to this virtual community, Ardcalloch, which you'll see in a moment. They have the usual suite of discussion forums and so on, and very often we communicate with them about the tasks that they have to do via frequently asked questions lists. But if we give all that to the students, we have to also design environments as well for the tutors to facilitate and then assess the students. Very often our environments are both learning and assessment environments together. So we have to give the tutors assessment web pages, admin environments. I'll show you examples of that later. This is Ardcalloch, and this is the history page. You'll see at the top there that we have a directory, a map, introduction and history. There are 7 sections to this history page. This is the origins of Ardcalloch, this fictional community. I spent many happy hours literally dovetailing, not to say making up, Scottish legal history and Scottish history here, so that we have a kind of interleaving, as it were, of the two. So, for example, there is an Orkneyinga saga. There was an Earl Ronald. But St Kentigern, well, no, there wasn't any St Kentigern as far as we know. There was a St Kentigern, who was the patron saint of Glasgow. But, so we have this kind of feminist founder of Ardcalloch. And she's noted for being interested in issues of justice and so on in the Celtic Church. And rather unusual, she's a female Celtic saint as well. So we have lots of things that you can do things there with these sorts of things. For example, in jurisprudence terms, it's really quite fascinating to see what would have happened in Scottish legal history had there been some kind of a legal centre in the west of Scotland as opposed to the east in Edinburgh, which gradually became a kind of administrative centre throughout the early Middle Ages and gradually, of course, the capital for many of the governmental functions in Scotland. We also, though, have a map. The students look at the history and they think I'm nuts. They think, oh, you spend your time actually writing this stuff. That's okay. But the map is slightly more important to the students because it gives a sense of place. Up here at the top there, you can see the River Clyde. Glasgow is somewhere over there. And the Clyde kind of exits there in the Firth. Bishopton is a real place. The rest of it is entirely made up. It's also made up for a particular reason because I want to get the profile of a normal west of Scotland provincial centre. So we've got a medieval town centre there. And if you look over here, we have a kind of 20th century industrial estate. We also have Greyhill here, which is a rundown, very much working class area, poor tenemental housing, slum clearance housing, that sort of thing, beside the docks. We have slightly better tenemental housing in this district here, Rankeeler. In Ardcalloch, we have more middle class housing there and in Kirkwood. And in Jewell, in the middle of the leafy Ardcalloch Country Park, we have the sort of posh housing that you would normally see, said he, thinking, this is my first visit to Seattle, on those islands when we were, that sort of thing. So we're trying to get a kind of social representation, as it were, socio-economic representation of a town. Why am I doing this, for goodness sake? Well, because law is not the only discipline for which simulations are useful. The built environment, engineering, architecture, town and country planning are only 4 examples within the faculties in the university which could use this sort of simulated environment. And in fact, we're already working with other people, and not just within Strathclyde, but elsewhere. For example, about a year and a half ago, I was involved with my Learning Technologies Development Officer, Scott Walker, in a 2-day seminar with Dutch academics from 11 institutions. And they have formed their own little town, their fictional town called Sieberdam or Cyberdam. And we will have links between Sieberdam and Ardcalloch there. And there will be international negotiations, for example, contract disputes and stuff like that, using the simulated environment. We can zoom in, and as we zoom in, we can see more of the environment. As you can see, the thumbnail map to the left there begins to change. Also, we have about 200 or 300 photographs attached to various streets. You see in the bottom left there, that changes. Again, to give a sense of place, as it were, to the various streets and the environment of the streets. We can zoom in further. You can see the sorts of websites here now that we begin to use for our transactions. For example, Campbell's auctioneer. Very important for valuation of estate, for example, in private client matters. Our Sheriff Court, one of the inferior courts in Scotland, and a very important court for both civil and criminal matters. And you can see there's some business there already in the court. We have a firm in Alba Technology, Alba Industrial Estate called Technology. It's a global firm. It's come into Ardcalloch on the wave of the dot-coms, and it's now kind of retrenching. This is very interesting because it presents a lot of legal problems for not only global but also for Ardcalloch itself. Produces a variety of products and uses the workforce, but it wants to move out of Ardcalloch. And so in the professional competence course, at least half of our course is based around transactions that uses not only the website but the characters in global. For example, in criminal advocacy and criminal procedure, there's a break-in in the factory and computers are stolen and things like that. Or in family law, the managing director is undergoing a divorce. He's got property in Manhattan as well as in Ardcalloch, so there's problems there for our trainees who are on that course. In IP, well, there's a research and development group which is actually doing pretty well for itself and wants to move out. There's company law problems, commercial problems there as well. How do they do that? How do they kind of detach themselves and retain the IP that they want in that kind of environment? And you can begin to see that there's a lot of kind of transactions, as it were, that can be pieced together using a narrative, as it were, like this. Okay, returning to the tools that we have, remember at the top there's directory, map, introduction, history. This is a directory, and this is the real heart of the simulation, as it were, because students use this a lot. What we have there are businesses, and if we can search the businesses there, these are all a list of the websites that we have there. We can also search the law firms. These are, of course, screenshots of what we have. But we can go onto the web if you want later, if we have the time to have a look at it. Remember, there's an awful lot of lawyers as well. 64 firms in Ardcalloch, for a provincial town. That's quite a lot. In fact, as students pointed out, rather acerbically in the local Ardcalloch news, there are more lawyers than nurses in Ardcalloch, and was this a good thing for society? And this is an example of a generic front end to a public front end to one firm, Bell, Freeland, Dalton. All the names are generic. If we go into the pretend that we're going into the intranet, then first, and I've blanked out some of the names of students for anonymity. What you see here is in effect a communication centre for the firm to communicate with itself and also with tutors and with practice managers who are also tutors. You can see here to the left, if you look over there to your left, you'll see that there's instructions that we give them in the projects that they do in conveyancing. For example, they buy and sell property over the web. So there are 2 transactions that they do. And in that way, they get an overview of these transactions while they're doing them, while they're learning about them in their tutorials as well. In addition, in private client, they wind up the estate of a deceased client. And the instructions are put in that particular folder there. They can construct notes to file and attach them to files there. They have practice management issues. They have a firm diary, tasks, minutes. They have to keep a personal log of their activities as well, because we don't want any freeloaders. We don't want people kind of hiding behind the sort of collaborative group work ethic that we have on the diploma. So the personal logs go to practice management tutors. We can talk about that later if you want, and how that pans out. We also have a concept called ADEX. You can just see it up here, Ardcalloch Digital Exchange. We don't want the students to get the idea that you can just email something over the web to a client or somebody else involved in a transaction, the other side or whatever. Things have to be secure, have to be encrypted, as it were. So what we give them is this fiction, as it were, that there is indeed an ADEX digital exchange already existing, a secure digital exchange in Ardcalloch, which they can use. This is an example of them creating mail, as it were, letters in the personal injury project. You can see again the case files at the left there. What these are in effect, there's a letter. What these are in effect are learning management centres, as it were. It's almost like a kind of virtual learning environment that we've created here. We've created it for professional students because Blackboard doesn't give us that. WebCT, any of the usual kind of vendors, they can produce for us nothing like this sort of thing that we need for our particular discipline, and indeed our sub-area of law. It's one of the things that I hold quite dearly to, that it's all very well to have generic learning management environments, LMEs, but when you actually come down to your discipline, very often you'll want to use it in ways that you can't, that you feel that you're very much constrained to use the way that to use the structure of the LME that the vendor wants you to use. And there's always going to be that kind of tension. Let's take an example. Personal injury project. Administration, very briefly, say 254 students, 64 firms. What we do there is we effectively feed the students information in real time. So there are 7 of us, myself and 6 postgrads. I train the postgrads. I support the postgrads online via discussion forum. And they effectively manage all the mail that's sent to the fictional characters, and we'll see how that's done in a moment or two, in Ardcalloch. That means we constructed 64 document sets, and there are 32 transactions, obviously, with one set of firms representing the injured claimant, and another set who are the insurer solicitors. We start with introductory, we end with feedback lectures, we've got a discussion forum, and that's it. There are voluntary face-to-face surgeries with a PI solicitor, Charlie Hennessy, who's on the discussion forum with me. But apart from that, there is no tuition whatever. Yes? The question was, what is a surgery? Sorry, a surgery is like a voluntary class that students can go to, small scale, and the issues come from the students, rather than it being a kind of formal teaching session, as it were. Okay, assessment criteria. We set no learning outcomes for this. Instead, we say to the students, we want 4 bodies of evidence here. We want fact-finding, because we find that students are very poor at fact-finding. Trainees as well. It's not something they ever do in law school. They're always given scenarios on a plate, whereas what we want to be able to do is to help them to begin to think about facts and how important these are. By obviously communicating with information sources in the virtual community. Professional legal research is opposed to academic research. And we'll see students in the feedback talking about the differences, because they, having gone through a transaction like this, they begin to see that very clearly for themselves. We also want them to form negotiation strategy. It's not a matter of haggling. There are ways, the Harvard negotiation project and all the rest of it. We give all of that theory, and we give them some kind of introduction over 2 days in a foundation course, which lasts 2 weeks, where effectively we go through a very kind of cognitive base of tell, show, do through a number of skills, interviewing, negotiation advocacy, writing, drafting. And basically what we do there is give them the basis so that they can use the theory and the skills that they're developing in the 2-day workshops, for example, in this project here, vis-à-vis negotiation. We also need performance strategy. We want to see the correspondence that they produce, both with the characters in Ardcalloch and the institutions in Ardcalloch, and also with the other side. And they can have a face-to-face meeting, which has to be recorded in some way or another. We can see the facilitator administration page here. This is the page, this is my pseudonym, Ewan Magnus, and this is my facilitation page for last year. To the left there are the firms that I'm looking at. I can look at their correspondence file. I can see their drafts and their collaboration, the tools that they use to collaborate with each other. So I can check what's going on in the firm. Local Dobbs and Spence are matched against McDade and Stewart. And they're effectively acting for the claimant, and they're acting for the defender. I can communicate with the mentors using this message forum. We're into the intranet now, out of PowerPoint. We have the PI FAQ there. And if I go into this here, what you will see is the my replies to the students there as a number of different characters, including the client, Larry Smith. There's a fair amount to Larry Smith, obviously, because they're communicating with me, which is good. They're talking to the client. They're letting the client know what's happening, including brilliant news. That's me responding to their mail, telling me how much I had won in the negotiation. This is the last piece of negotiation, obviously. So I'm kind of writing in character there as a 59-year-old blacksmith who's been working all his life as a blacksmith, and basically I'm trying to say, this is great, chaps, well done. You've done really well here. Notice, though, that if we go back, that I have access here via document templates and to this to a number of resources there. For example, I can look at the accident book. I can look at, there's the accident book there, for example. So if I'm actually acting as a character, say in Ardcalloch Insurance Group, AIG, then I know what one of my insurance agents has actually been saying, putting together there. There's all the, this is an extract from the accident book. In addition, I can also send them, in addition to lots of other kind of template or standard letters, I can also send them photographs of the work area, of the grinder on which the accident happened. And I can email that photograph to them in one guise or another. For example, if they ask me as Alan Jackson, an independent health and safety expert, then I'm taking photographs of the locus. I can send that to them, and basically they can begin to make of it what they want. For example, it's guarded, according to health and safety law. It does have, but the guy injured his thumb on this. So, how does all that piece together in terms of fact-finding? So you can see that what we have is really the sniff of the real there, and trying to give that as much as possible. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Did everybody hear that? How do you avoid kind of plagiarism and passing it on? Well, basically, all our simulations are slightly different. And to avoid the plagiarism, what we do is we construct a matrix where the names are different, the wage levels are different, and the injuries are different as well. So there's no point in kind of copying, as it were, what one group is doing, say, last year, because the fact situation is actually so different. In addition, and this is the really fascinating thing, folks, this sort of what we call open field transaction is very much like a game of chess. The first couple of moves are pretty standard, but thereafter, because you are depending on the firm asking me, as being one of about 17 characters, to come and get information from me, it can go anywhere. Yeah, so you can't actually mimic from one transaction to the next. One firm can actually say to another, and we can't stop them. They can say, well, we get good information from, this guy, Alan Jackson, health and safety expert. Okay, well, that's fine. I don't mind students actually helping each other with that. But they've still got to write the letter, and they've still got to get the information and then act on the information in a different environment, in a different context. Each transaction is slightly different. This year we're going with an entirely different transaction. Generally, these transactions have a shelf life of about 2 to 3 years. This is its third year. This year we've put together an entirely different transaction. But you're right, it's a lot of work. Okay, discussion forum. We have we have a discussion forum there, very actively used by the students. You'll see a discussion forum tomorrow that wasn't actively used in very many ways, and it's quite fascinating to compare the reasons why. And we also give an FAQ there to the students. We also have a VLE handbook where we explain to them precisely what we want them to be doing as far as this transactional learning is concerned. Really important to communicate to students what this is all about. So the sorts of issues that we discuss with them in this handbook, which we also put online, obviously, are here. So we tell them what simulation learning is about, why transactional learning is important. We tell them about the assessment procedures. But we also tell them about the group skills, responsibility delegation, that kind of thing, how to work delegation so that they can maximise the work within the firm, but they're all producing something at the end of the day. Okay. And if we look at collaboration tools, you can see that there. We track the students as they're actually working. So, for example, we can give them in the feedback lecture, we can give them this sort of feedback here. Look at Firm 41, for example, here. 56 pieces of correspondence, massive piece of work, over 9 weeks. Dealing with all of that, thinking about it as well. They put in a huge amount of work. Very impressive, and they bankrupted the firm as well. You know? So we're trying to teach them about smart working. Look at Firm 16. Shower of lazy individuals. They barely passed the project. They did no work at all, and towards about a month before the deadline, they began to kind of wake up and they began to kind of put things together. But look at Firm 38. They did very well indeed. They sent just enough letters in order to get the facts that they needed to put together the strategy, and they performed the strategy very well. They were kind of lean, streamlined, they got the result, and they did it in a very effective way. So what we're actually telling the students here is it's not about hard work, it's about thinking about the stuff that you have to do in a very clinical way, in a very kind of practitioner-oriented way. In addition, we show them how the timeline stretches over the weeks of the project. Sometimes the project, some years it's 11 weeks, sometimes it's 9, sometimes it's 10, depending on other things that are happening. Look at this pink one here. I'm colour-blind, but kind of light blue or whatever. This enormous great spike here, you know, in the last week. That was the first year we ran it. There was just myself and three postgrads who were involved in that. Quite extraordinary. We answered 871 emails in 1 week. There was not much time left for eating and sleeping and so on. And there was a great deal of heart searching amongst the three of us after, when we'd actually recovered ourselves. Why did this happen? Well, it happened because the students were treating this like an exam, basically, you know. Socialised for 2, 3, 4, 5 years into thinking about examinations, they did the same with this. They didn't get the message. One of the reasons why we produced this VLE book to explain to them in great detail what we wanted them, why we were asking them to do this and all the rest of it. So they were thinking about examinations, but it wasn't their fault. It was our fault for actually not giving them enough information in the first place about that and about this very different form of learning. So next year we did that, and as you can see in 2000, 2001, it's like darker blue there, we have the students starting a lot earlier and coming up, and you'll see that basically it kind of goes level there. There was an assessment point, and it drops markedly there because there was another assessment point for another subject during the semester. So attention switches, as it were, to that assessment. And then it just gradually, thank God, fades away towards the end. And we knew we'd cracked it then, that we could handle that email flow, as it were. What did the students learn? Well, some years we ask for feedback reports, and they tell us what they've learned in their reflective reports. And you'll notice that extraordinary variety of the sorts of things that they're learning, all extremely practical things, quite profound practical things as well that they're learning there. And this is one reason why we don't set learning outcomes, because in a kind of open field project like this, there's really no point in setting a learning outcome to be achieved at the end of the project, when the students are learning a whole variety of quite different things, all of it very germane to legal practice. And we also ask them, what would you have done differently if you had to do this thing again? And as you can see there, avoid excessive legal research, one firm said. Typical of kind of research you do, or a lot of students do in academic learning. Persistence in retrieving information. That's also tied up with writing skills as well, the analysis of their own writing skills and so on. Fixing definite closing dates too, because of course they could be emailing us endlessly right up to the day of the day of submission of the project. All of my students and myself as well, we're very amiable. We give as much information as they want. But if we don't understand something, then we're very quick to say, don't understand this, what are you talking about, and so on. So basically, they could effectively continue that process for as long as they wanted. But at some point, they've got to stop that fact-finding process and move into legal research and into negotiation strategy. And that obviously involves time management skills there. And look at what they're saying here at the end here. What it's like to take control of a situation we barely knew anything about. Quite remarkable that, because they are not given any classes in this. They are postgraduate students. They are very bright students. They are learning for themselves. That's what's really critical here. And they're learning and they're taking it to closure. Look at this analysis. I think it's quite a profound analysis of what is going right and wrong in the group. The first mistake is exactly how a lot of students actually, in their academic courses, approach legal problems, isn't it? They look immediately for the answer because they treat it like an exam problem, and there's a question, there's an answer out there, and it was somewhere in that course that we had there. So they immediately begin to jump to conclusions. But the whole nature of this project means that they can't jump to conclusions because all the fact sets that they have to find are different. They have to think hard about those fact sets. And similarly, in the second paragraph there, they're learning about writing skills. And writing skills is not just about writing short sentences, and making yourself clear in the letter. It's also thinking about the questions that you want to ask your audience and asking it in a way that will get the right answer. And it's also about bearing in mind the client. One classic instance of that happened a couple of years ago, where two firms actually didn't finish the project at all. They submitted no project, which is really remarkable. Most firms, the vast majority of firms, submit. When I asked them, it was clear that there was a major breakdown between the two firms. In part, it happened because one firm, the defender, consistently denied that there was any case to answer at all. And the other firm got more and more annoyed at this stance. And basically, their correspondence was quite remarkable. It was very polite to start with, and then it began to get a little icy, and then it began to kind of heat up a bit, and then it got very hot. And you could see the gradual breakdown of trust and communication between them. Eventually, they just stopped talking to each other. They literally stopped talking to each other. They would not talk in coffee bars. I was presented with a problem there. What do? Do I get the two firms in, send them into a room, be very parental, and say, right, go into the room and don't come out until you've settled? Or do I fail them outright? They haven't submitted a settlement here. I could do that too. But that wouldn't be a learning experience for them. There's a bit of a dilemma for me, in part created by my own rules there for the project. And the only way out for me there was to bring in a visiting professor who's an expert in mediation. And we conducted a mediation there with the two firms over half a day. And at the end there was a settlement, and they learned quite profoundly not only about the nature of mediation as it applied to their particular and very pressing personal circumstances, but they also learned what it is to lose sight of the client. Absolutely, yeah. And of course, that brings us back to EverQuest, where I started from, to take it back again. Don't know if you've seen films like Truman Show and these films about some kind of virtual reality, and Pleasantville as well. The George Parker is the dad in the kind of 50s soap there. And things don't change in Pleasantville; they always remain the same. And David is the kind of him and his sister. They find themselves in Pleasantville. Pleasantville is disrupted when these two late 20th century kids come in there with entirely different attitudes. And George can't understand that people change here. David says, "Yeah." And George Parker immediately says, "Well, can they change back?" David is, "I don't know. I think it's harder," he says there. And in many respects, this little, very innocent little kind of exchange here between a soap character and a real person is a bit like academic and practice there, because of course the students change. They change throughout the diploma. But unless us on the diploma, unless we actually recognise that they are changing, then we're not going to be doing very much with them, as it were, and helping them to construct their identities as lawyers. And this really came out in this particular student's feedback here. Because there was one person in this firm who didn't pull his weight. And we really had to have the firm in, talk about the issues that were involved there, and why this person wasn't working well with the rest of the firm. In fact, eventually the firm the four of them went to a counsellor, and they talked over the issues that were involved there. Again, there was an enormous amount of learning actually went on there for this firm, learning that I hope they will transfer to their practical contexts. Okay, transactional learning, just to finish up very quickly. These are the things. I've been showing you examples of transactional learning. We kind of summarise our approach through these 5 points here. And you can see how important that is to students as they're entering legal practice. One very quick example, just 2 slides here, of another project, private client, much more structured, where effectively we are using the environment to facilitate them in the production of 4 documents in a series of documents. Initial writs, valuation, forms C1IH, T200, that's for inheritance tax, and also a will. We give them no lectures, no exams. There are tutorials, there's coursework that they do for the tutorials. There are 50 scenarios. There's this collection of the client's estate and the usual tools there. Here is an example of a tutor's page, assessment page there. And you can see that there is past first attempt on wills, first attempt on initial writ, but not on the estate valuation correspondence. In this project here, we say to the students they get a merit if they pass all at first diet. But if they fail the second attempt, then they're up for an examination. So it's kind of like carrot and stick, I suppose. But the students get the idea that they can't just endlessly redraft, because our tutors can't endlessly remark either. And if 4 bright brains can't do this sort of work in a group, helping each other, then they've really got to examine how they're working and so on. And that's an end. We have approximately 5 minutes for questions. As I say, folks, this is just a very general overview of the sorts of transactional learning that we're doing using simulations. Any questions? Sorry?
Okay. I'd like you to speak a little bit about the technology required to put this together and the amount of time it took. I realize it's probably always a work in progress, but if somebody were to begin something like this, what are we talking about?
Yeah. Okay, question was technology, what is it, and time, how much. Could I maybe start with another issue, which is people, because there's myself in the ggsl, and until fairly recently I was the only full-timer there. except for what we call the Learning Technologies Development Officer, who is Scott Walker. We now have a team there, Learning Technologies Development Unit, and we'll show you more of the products tomorrow that small team has produced. Scott is the officer in charge of it. We have a programmer, and we have 2 web designers as well. That's very important because I think this sort of stuff has got to look stylish. It's not got to look homemade. It's got to look fairly slick for the students to be, dare I say it, impressed with it, or at least use it. And we've also got a network maintenance officer as well. They work really well as a team. This could not be supported or maintained without them, as it were. It certainly couldn't be taken forward in other projects. I've been working on this since I arrived in the ggsl in January 1999, effectively 2000. So I've been putting it together in bits and pieces. We've used a variety of different pieces of software. Initially, Scott and I worked using Microsoft Outlook, and we used Outlook as an interface because a number of large firms in Scotland, McGregor Donalds, for example, I don't know if they still do that, but certainly at that time they used Outlook as a kind of front end, as it were, for a lot of their practice management software. And so we used that as well. And that worked fairly well, but it was quite a constraining metaphor for a lot of things that we wanted to be able to do. For example, it took us ages to find out how to manipulate the software so that email, because it was effectively email rather than letters or web pages, as it were, how email could be sent to one person acting as 17 different characters, because Outlook is not set up to do that sort of thing. And eventually we abandoned that and moved wholly to a web-based version of that, using basically Macromedia products, using Flash, and using databases, SQL Server, that kind of thing. So in a sense, it's not one kind of generic, kind of packaged, boxed environment that we're working on. We're pulling together bits and pieces of software that we can use.
Where does it fit resource-wise for students into the entire curriculum? Is this, say, 15 credits perhaps in a semester? Is this 3 out of 15, or is this like most of what they're doing during the semester, or what percentage of the time are they spending on this?
I would, a rough guesstimate, I would say about a quarter of their effort goes on this sort of transactional learning. There are 3 transactions at the moment: conveyancing, private client, and PI. And we're going to have a public administration liquor licensing project coming online quite soon as well. And thereafter, there are obvious for every kind of subject that you can think of in practice. In the legal practice education, there is a use for this environment here. Ideally, we would like one project within each area. So if there's 8, we want a project in each of those areas. In other words, we want them to be working a lot of time online, as it were, in these projects, because we do feel that this is by no means everything that they should be doing, but it's certainly an awful lot of what they can be learning about in terms of transactions. For example, solicitors always tell us that, well, students know about conveyancing and they know what the documents are, but they can't string it together. You give them a file and they don't know where they are in the file or what's to be done next and things like that. What we're talking about is exactly that last point I put up there about transactional learning, holistic learning. So, in other words, they're learning about things in the tutorials, but they're not piecing it together in a transaction and then being able to transfer that into practice. And hopefully transactional learning, as we've defined it here, is a bridge, as it were, to help the kind of atomistic learning that they have in their tutorials about the various bits and pieces of conveyancing, how it fits together, into practice itself. So effectively, I think that can be done in most areas, except of course in skills. But legal skills is something entirely different, and we'll say more about that tomorrow. Yes?
What value added does the technology add to construction simulations and having people role play and having students write you a letter on paper and give them some paper back with the answer, or?
Yeah. The value added is quite enormous in lots of ways, but there's also downsides too. The value added for us is that we could not run this on paper. Absolutely not. I mean, we're running 3 transactions there simultaneously. There are gigabytes of information flying backwards and forwards. That's why databases are utterly crucial to this. You cannot do it with dockets and letters going backwards and forwards. It's just not possible. But it's also constraining as well. We start off the PI project with a little video, for example, where the client comes in and talks to Charlie, who is the lawyer. But we can't have a real client, or we could if we were using voice over IP or something like that, and they could talk on the telephone perhaps, but we've not gone down that route yet. But effectively, it is a kind of electronic transaction there within the personal injury and also private client as well. But then the vast majority of transactions in a legal office are carried out that way too. And if they were talking about interacting face-to-face with clients, they learn that in other bits of the diploma. Ideally, though, what I would like is some kind of an integration of that environment with the transactional environment that you have here. Not in sense of avatars and NORAth, but in terms of the students putting together things ground up, what Clay was talking about in the first day. The ability, for example, to interview a client and then to store it on a server and then to analyze it themselves, but also to think, well, yes, that's the beginning of our PI project, and then to kind of bundle that together with other examples of maybe their letters or their drafting and all the rest of it, and then maybe be able to show that to future employers. Put it on a disk or protected part of the server and say, look, here's an example of my work. I think that's really that is really a kind of a marvelous use of technology there. Any other questions? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. Hi. Yeah, my pleasure. Hi. Stephen, yes.
Visiting Strathclyde for
Right.
in your office, and you showed me either an older version of this in a different legal environment.
Yeah, it could have been.
It's grown.
It's growing, yeah. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Edward, hi. Thank you. My pleasure. See you.
You'd have to make your own judgment about how would the
obviously that will change the outcome.
So, anyway, for a couple of bucks you could buy just a dozen of them and try them out. But because I know what you mean, at some point, you get that. It's just pressure. And it'd be a lot easier to go back and forth to the pointer on the keyboard. One finger on the keys would be click, 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 and click. That's all. The kind of finger picks that I like are metal, and it's hard to describe them, but they're cut out in the middle, so your hand of your fingers is clear. Yeah, even without it, you could type, you just be, you wouldn't feel it.
No, that too.
I wouldn't be surprised. This is exactly the kind of place I'd see one. Anyway, guitarist finger pick. Yeah, they come in with all kinds of stuff. So if they show you just one thing, ask them. They have other kinds. I'm Richard Mexter with Aspen Publishing. I'm here, because I publish content, not books. I'm trying to figure out
So when you're working
how
on
to get
this
from
project,
publishing books to publishing
they go into the
whatever.
tutorial to talk
I
about
don't know.
how they work.
I've got a few ideas. But I have the same challenges that you described. That people being described as other challenges, which is self-faculty, keen eye, selective, has to be supported, deal with who's paying for it. It's a challenge. Any technology that's going to bear my kind. I have an experiment going on at law school now where 75 first years are going to get all of their books loaded onto a computer. And it should be a tablet. Yeah, it should definitely.
Navigate through those books much easier.
Yeah, we ran the previous semester. We actually did have it.
What did you do with the other side?
Law school blogs were rented out. They got their hands on tablets. Some students didn't use them. They wanted the material on their laptops. But those who used the styluses,
They couldn't do it.
tablets were very impressed. But for a group of 75 students, we can't specify their hardware. There's too many machines for the law school to pay for.
You can save from that practice.
That's the way to do it.
Get it started.
And not only why you're specifying it, but what the limits are.
Yeah, in fact, we just finished the test. We're giving a presentation on webcam use to capture simulation exercises and feedback. We tested every machine for years. Students who are in the MBA joint degree program who are still hanging around will have this older machine.